I'm Ramin Chaloui, Distinguished Policy Fellow here at SIEPR, and it is my privilege to introduce Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, who will deliver our keynote address this evening. Senator Kelly has worn many hats, more precisely many helmets, in a remarkable career. He grew up in West Orange, New Jersey, the son of two police officers, whom he credits for teaching him the value of public service. He trained in marine engineering at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and later earned a master's degree in aeronautical engineering from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. During his career in the military, he flew combat missions as a Navy attack pilot and later served as a test pilot, eventually logging more than 5,000 flight hours and landing on aircraft carriers more than 375 times. Apparently unsatisfied with that level of achievement, he went on to become a NASA astronaut, flying 4 space shuttle missions, including commanding the final mission of the Space Shuttle Endeavour and supporting the International Space Station. In 2019, he decided to enter politics, and in 2020 was elected senator from Arizona in a special election to complete the term of the late John McCain. In the Senate, he is focused on issues central to America's future: rebuilding infrastructure, expanding semiconductor manufacturing, improving care for veterans, and enhancing border security. Tonight, he will share with us his vision for addressing the next big challenge and opportunity for America's future: artificial intelligence. In September, Senator Kelly released AI for America, a roadmap for lasting leadership that benefits all Americans, which laid out a set of policy proposals for harnessing this powerful technology for the benefit of all in our country. In that document, he writes, quote, "This roadmap marks the start of a necessary collaboration across public and private sectors, labor and technology, rural towns and big cities, the full fabric of who we are as a nation. These ideas are not the end of the conversation, and they don't cover every aspect of AI and our society. But I hope they can add fuel toward efforts to address these challenges head-on." The spirit of both inquiry and action embedded in those words is the same spirit that I know animates many in this room and has certainly animated the discussions we've had here today. So I can think of no better way to conclude our forum than by welcoming Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona to share his vision for AI for America. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Ramin. Thank you for the introduction. Great to be here at Stanford. This is my first time on the campus. I've been to Palo Alto a lot, driving around. I've seen the outside, but never been on the campus, so it's really great to be here. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll actually get a chance to see it. So thank you for the invitation. And it's an important conversation. And I think this is going to be one of the most important topics of our lifetimes for all of us. And 2 questions that I get a lot are, one, what am I optimistic about? And 2, what keeps me up at night? Now remember, I sit on the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committee. So there's a lot that keeps me up. But it's rare that the answer to those questions is the same thing. But right now, for me, and probably for a lot of folks in this room, I think the answer to that is, it is AI. We are in what many see as a race to dominate AI, to be not much just the most advanced or the first past any given milestone, but to be the home of the models and the hardware that the entire world will depend on. It holds the promise to accelerate scientific discovery, cure disease, expand economic opportunity, increase productivity, and improve the quality of life for millions of people. With all that promise, though, comes a huge amount of responsibility. We have to approach this exciting moment with clear eyes. When technology moves faster than policy, people can get hurt. Think about the early 20th century with the advent of electricity. The world did not simply become a little bit more efficient, it transformed in every way. But when electricity first spread across the United States, there was no federal regulation on it for decades. Power companies frequently manipulated markets, exploited families, and helped destabilize entire regions. Real federal oversight to balance the benefits of electricity with protection for everyday Americans did not arrive until the Great Depression, long after a lot of people already were hurt. If you believe, as I do, that AI has the potential to be even more disruptive to our economy and to our way of life, you have to see this as a cautionary tale. I was reading The Economist the other day on the plane flying back to DC, and in this article about the economics of AI, it talked about how until the year 1700, the global economy didn't ever really grow all that much. And in a 100-year period, it would typically grow about 8%. Now that began to change with steam engines in the 19th century and then finally electricity in the 20th century, when it grew by 350% in a 100-year period, in a century. So it's not just that we can and we came to expect growth, it's that the growth itself accelerated. And if you believe some folks in Silicon Valley, artificial general intelligence could take annual growth much higher. It could. We were having this discussion earlier. Maybe it won't. We're going to have to see. And as an engineer by training, and as a former test pilot and a former commander of the space shuttle, I've been at the forefront of innovation throughout my entire career and applied it in matters of life and death, literally. Whether it's ChatGPT, which I use almost every single day, or Grok, which I never use, or Gemini, or Claude, or Llama, not even sure what that one is, or any of these other generative tools, I see how AI is poised to change so much of our lives. And the tech companies deploying the technology and the infrastructure to support it are benefiting enormously. And that's what has people in this room, in Silicon Valley boardrooms, in Wall Street offices, and around kitchen tables around the country asking some very important questions like, will AI create new jobs and increase productivity, or is it going to leave workers struggling to find long-term career opportunities? Or does AI infrastructure have to be a strain on local resources? Or can we stop a race to the bottom and create a renewable energy boom from this? Or will the public trust AI enough to use it responsibly? Or will there be skepticism that will mean that we adopt it more slowly than countries like our adversaries, like possibly China? It benefits all of us for America to lead in AI. And it was our workforce, our infrastructure, and our innovation that got us to where we are in the first place. That innovation happened here. But while I hear those questions are being asked in so many places around the country, I seldom hear them being asked in one place that I spend a lot of time in, and that's Washington, D.C. That's why in September I released AI for America, a roadmap that identifies policy gaps and provides recommendations on how we tackle them. We spent months speaking with labor leaders, with tech experts, with local governments, CEOs, universities, and nonprofits. because the technology and the problems that we face are dynamic, and government needs to be agile, which is not something that Washington, D.C. is known for. We can build the foundations right now for an AI boom that benefits all Americans, not just a few tech billionaires, but where it also supports responsible tech innovation and development for years to come. That's what we need. At the core of AI for America is a common sense principle, and that's that major tech companies benefiting from the rise of AI should pitch in to an AI Horizon Fund that benefits workers and benefits community infrastructure, which are the very foundations of AI innovation. With the rapid rise of AI, it's anticipated that millions of jobs could be lost. And if we don't plan now, Americans may struggle to find reliable, good-paying jobs, and income inequality could get worse. I've spoken to some soon-to-be college graduates who are trying to get into the job market. These are kids who did everything right. They studied hard, they sacrificed to pay tuition, they built the resumes that they were told they needed. Yet they are stepping into a job market where entry-level positions now require a different set of skills, and where AI might soon be a substitute for the tasks that they were training to do. This is the same generation, by the way, whose lives were already turned upside down by COVID. And they're saddled with college debt, and they worry that the dream of home ownership is out of reach because of skyrocketing costs. There's some people in here, I imagine, I see somebody, at least one person, nodding their head. Now, as these kids step into adulthood, they're facing a wave of technological change. And they're not asking for guarantees. They're asking for a fair shot at a meaningful career. That's why we need employers to step up. One approach comes from the Duolingo CEO, a guy named Luis Van On, and rather than seeing AI as a reason to downsize, I've spoken to him about this. He's treating it as an opportunity to invest in their people through upskilling. And that is a model for others to follow. We also know in some industries, that's not going to be enough for workers in the middle of their careers. Ain't going to work. To support them, we need a more modern, nimble unemployment insurance system and job training programs so that these Americans have the opportunity to make their own informed decisions about what is next for them, what is best for them and their families. Now, the best way to prepare for the jobs of the future is early exposure to AI. If students can start using AI as a tool rather than a crutch, they will be better prepared to succeed. Community college and university partnerships with the employers who are using AI tools will help students develop the skills to take on an AI-driven job market. Registered apprenticeships, credentialing, and public-private partnerships are some of the ways that we can increase the chances of young people finding good-paying jobs after they are finished with school. All of this is possible if we resource it through the AI Horizon Fund, with our focus set on supporting and preparing workers. Has to be worker-focused. And it rewards industry with the next generation of innovators that industry will need. The fund would also help us tackle the challenges posed to our infrastructure by AI. AI depends on having the computers and the energy needed to train, develop, and deploy its models. As companies build more data centers to meet increasing demand for AI services, they put extra pressure on power grids and other public systems. We just saw an example of this outside of Tucson, Arizona, where I live. The community reacted to concerns over the expansion of Project Blue data centers, that's Amazon, and the impact that it would have on their energy, water, and land. And Arizona is far from the only place where communities are insisting on a seat at the table as big companies make decisions that directly affect them. We can all agree that communities should have a voice in their future and that AI should strengthen rather than strain local resources. So my roadmap outlines 3 principles for AI companies to invest in the very infrastructure that they rely on. First, fair cost sharing so companies, not families and small businesses, pay for the power plants, pay for the transmission lines, pay for the water treatment plants and other facilities that they will need. Second, long-term investments in sustainable and reliable infrastructure. The AI boom should build clean and resilient energy systems that don't just meet the needs of today, but lay the foundations for success for future generations. And lastly, but most importantly, community partnerships that prioritize authentic engagement and deliver concrete benefits. This is how we make sure that AI infrastructure is built responsibly and that the energy costs and public backlash do not stop the expansion needed to keep America's leadership in AI. All of this also works towards a goal that underpins it all, building public trust in AI. That trust must be earned by the companies developing and deploying these tools. It's not going to happen automatically. Today, only 41% of people trust AI. Probably better than Congress, but not great. Already, we are seeing studies and polls that show Americans are growing more skeptical of AI and of its safety. At a time when access to AI has never been easier, it's literally at the tips of our fingertips, safety must be a priority of AI development, not an afterthought. Bad outcomes, whether they happen to kids using a chatbot or seniors that are harmed by AI-assisted scams, these make Americans scared and skeptical of AI and its use in their lives. Several studies have already shown that AI models can lie, they can cheat, they can scheme, they can hallucinate. The companies who train the models have themselves admitted to not knowing why AI responds the way it does in many of those cases. It is the responsibility of industry and the government to make AI tools safe. Industry must innovate responsibly with that in mind. There is a critical role for third-party testing and red teaming, we do this in the military, that protects consumers and builds trust. The government, working with industry, must also establish the needed and necessary guardrails so everyone can fully participate in our evolving digital society. That can be made easier by public-private partnerships supported by the AI Horizon Fund. Now, my goal with AI for America is to raise important questions about how the AI boom and its continued development can do a bunch of different things, which is one, put workers at the forefront. This needs to be focused on working people. 2, strengthen our public infrastructure. 3, protect our landscapes. 4, benefit communities as it expands, protect users, and ensure that this new and exciting chapter benefits all Americans, not just a wealthy few. My proposal is meant to be the start of a conversation. And as with any new technology, we have to be humble and acknowledge that none of us have all the answers. I certainly do not. My proposal is what it is here. We'll talk a little bit more about it here in a second, but I am happy to be with all of you here today to listen to you, to learn from you, and discuss different perspectives to make AI and our country successful. This can be a huge win for us if we get it right. I'm going to take what I learned here back to Washington, back to Arizona, and as I travel across the country, because we have an amazing opportunity to unleash a lot of promise of American innovation. This innovation often only happens here in our country. and working together with the same courage, creativity, and determination that defined our leadership from electrification to putting a man on the moon. The AI era is here. Now we got to seize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those remarks. A perfect capstone for the day of discussions with a bunch of people who care about the same issues and have ideas. Before turning to policy, I'd like to start with the personal. You mentioned in your remarks that you use ChatGPT almost every day. Tell us, what do you use it for? Personal, professional, and how does that experience affect the way that you think about some of the challenges and opportunities raised by AI?
I'd say I mostly use it for work. Sometimes I use it for math, like complicated math, like things I'm really interested in. Like, doing the math on, how long it would take to travel, not only to the Andromeda galaxy, but beyond. You know what? One thing I did once, this is pretty interesting. So with 2 trillion galaxies, I did this on AI, 2 trillion galaxies that we think minimum in the universe. I said, if each galaxy was the size of a dime, how physically big would the universe be as a sphere? Because it's always hard to conceptualize 2 trillion things in this space. Like, how big would this space be? So ChatGPT figured that out for me. And it was like something like, I'm trying to remember, it's like 8 miles in the diameter of the sphere, or 10 miles. You could fit 2 trillion of these little dime-sized galaxies. So it's stuff like that I use it for. But recently, like today in the car, I used it because the guy that drove us over here was an airplane mechanic in the military working on a certain engine for a certain airplane. And the airplane, I flew the A6 Intruder. I couldn't remember the Pratt & Whitney engine. So I kind of use it as Google, but it does a better. I hope there's nobody from Google here. Seems to do a better job. And I found out J52 engine. I was looking at just yesterday some stuff about the Army's multi-domain task force that we need to fully fund. I got something about insurrection charges on January 6th. Yeah, that's fun, isn't it? That was in the news today. President called me to be hanged. That was just a normal Friday in the United States Senate. So it's stuff like that. I use it for work a lot. And it's also often to get information. And I found, man, it is pretty damn good. I mean, I've been really impressed with ChatGPT. I should try the other ones, but this one's worked so far so good for me. Hasn't burned me yet.
So sticking with the personal, so you've been an engineer, you've been a pilot, you've had this long arc that you alluded to in engaging new technologies. And aviation, of course, is one area where this interface between human beings and systems with some degree of autonomy has a long history. Usually those are positive, but there are also negative handoffs, where handoffs between pilots and autopilots cause crashes. So, based on your own experience, how does that shape your view on how human beings, human institutions, workflows will engage these tools that are capable of doing some things autonomously or semi-autonomously?
Well, I think it's going to be able to do a lot really, really fast. And I feel very fortunate to live between Orville and Wilbur and whoever the last pilot is, that I had an opportunity to do this. Fly off of an aircraft carrier, to fly a spaceship, a rocket ship into space in a spaceship, fly it back to Earth. You got to manually fly the space shuttle through the atmosphere. We were never able to certify it for an auto landing, because we just couldn't do the amount of testing we need and certify that it would work, because it's a frickin' rocket ship. So we couldn't do enough. So we had to land it manually, and I had the opportunity to do that. And That's going away. Now, I don't know in what year a bunch of passengers get on an airliner and there's nobody sitting in the front. But I think that's going to happen eventually. It's probably decades, from now. But we all get on trains, with nobody operating them, at the airport. And I think those things are in the future, and we'll be able to make it. People get in cars now with nobody driving. I think the airplane is probably not too far away, so I feel really, fortunate about that. But the promise of this technology to solve some really hard problems. I mean, just sticking with aviation for a second. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I was the chairman, now I'm the ranking member on the Airland Subcommittee, which is all Army and Air Force programs. When we go to build a new airplane, these airplanes get more expensive and we get fewer of them. And if you plot the lines, eventually our defense budget is going to you plot it out into the future, it's going to buy us one airplane. Because the stuff we put in them the technology is so advanced and it takes so long to develop it and so many people, thousands and tens of thousands of people. And to build and design an airplane, a lot of it, these fighters were handmade initially. With digital design, and now you layer AI over the top of it, maybe we could design a whole new fighter, and we're going to use this on the next generation air dominance fighter and certainly FAXX for the Navy. We'll be able to design these things quicker with fewer people and get better technology in them so we can compete with our adversaries. And maybe we could start driving the costs down. That would be remarkable.
The speech you just gave and this plan that you released in September, AI for America, calls for what might be characterized a balanced and nuanced approach to AI. It's not, let's just lift all the restraints and go forward as fast as we can. It's not, let's stop this thing, it's too dangerous. You're calling for a policy that tries to harvest the benefits and mitigates the risks. Given that nuance and balance are not maybe the calling cards of Washington, D.C., and that the political alignment is a bit scrambled on AI in terms of the traditional Republican and Democratic views. You have skeptics on both the right and the left of AI. I'm interested in how you see the political environment for navigating and crafting kind of the road ahead in the way that you see. How do you build a coalition to advance the proposals of the kind that you've talked about?
Well, with big legislation like this, when we turn this into legislation, you often have to get bipartisan support and build a strong coalition, get a lot of people behind it. You're also up against a lot of challenges. Anything that has something like this AI Horizon Fund where we're going to try to raise money from companies. You ever see the movie The Wizard of Oz? Everybody seen The Wizard of Oz? Remember the flying monkeys that come out of the sky? Those are the lobbyists. Come flying out of the sky and just show up when you start talking about anything that has to do with trying to raise revenue from corporations, from people, anything about taxes. I mean, basically every issue. Armies of lobbyists. And I'm not anti-lobbyists. Lobbyists serve a valuable role, understand some of these issues really, really well, where we don't always have the bandwidth. We don't have, even though I have about 60 people on my staff, there's a lot of issues that it's hard to understand. But when you're talking about stuff this comprehensive, we will get a lot of input. Not only from groups of people like this, which we really want input, but we'll get input from other folks who have a very vested interest in the economics of this. You're talking about a little bit about, so let me back up. We have to build the coalition to make it happen. And I think it's really important we do, because we can get this wrong. We could wind up in a situation with millions of people out of work. I think AI needs to be worker-focused, to constantly think about the worker, because companies cannot be successful if people don't have jobs and income. I mean, companies like OpenAI and others and Anthropic, they rely on having customers. People have to have jobs. So we've got to grow this industry in a way that's smart. And you mentioned like, stopping it or turning it off. I don't even think that's possible. I don't think we should do that. I think there's so much we can gain from this, and the benefits to society are so huge. But even if we wanted to, it's not in our nature as humans to not progress forward. I mean, that's why we have people on this continent. Explorers wanted to see what's on the other side of the ocean. Humans always want to see what's over the hill, what's across the ocean, what's on that planet, what's on Mars. We are going to push forward, even though we know there is some risk here. That's why we've got to collaborate and try to get this we're not going to get it 100% right, but get it as close to that as possible.
Let's just stay on the AI Horizon Fund. That, as you know, this has drawn a lot of attention. It's an important part of the proposal. Can you elaborate on what your ideas are for funding the AI Horizon Fund? Commentators have pointed out that some of these leading AI companies aren't making profits to tax so far, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. So how do you operationalize this concept with the note that you make very clear that you're trying to start a conversation about this?
Right. So, yeah, a lot of them might not have a lot of profit, but some of them already have enormous amount of revenue. And that could be, part of where the help comes from to fund something, to fund our AI Horizon Fund. And you could base it on a number of different things. You could base it on tokens that are being, used to process information. You could base it on the number of chips that they buy, the amount of power that is consumed. I think there's a lot of ways, and we need to have those discussions. And as these companies become bigger and more profitable, I think their participation in trying to fund the worker retraining and the water and electrical and other infrastructure that has to be built becomes a part of what they have to expect to contribute to, every year. But also not only the companies that create the models, but how about all the companies out there that are going to benefit from the technology? I think they have a role here as well.
You mentioned the many months of discussion with experts that went into the preparation of this strategy. I'd like to focus on the area that I know is very important to you, which is helping the workforce with this transition. We haven't been great at that in the past, whether the changes have been from automation or trade, globalization, in trying to facilitate a smooth transition for affected workers. As you're thinking about artificial intelligence, what have your discussions led you to believe are the most important things that the federal government can do? Or would you say that this is an area where we actually just need more work from people, including in this room, to identify what can be consequential and effective?
Well, I've seen some community colleges that do this well, that do worker training and retraining. We've got a big semiconductor industry outside of Phoenix. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, has built a few fabs already. They're building more. They need thousands and thousands of technicians. There's a community college called Estrella Mountain Community College. They just on their own decided, hey, we're gonna build a program, pretty quickly, get people up to speed so they can get these jobs. And I've talked to some of these folks. I remember there was this woman I talked to on Zoom during COVID. She had 3 kids. She was a single mom. Her name was Tarjay Borders was her name. And she had a hard time finding the job. And then she finds this in her junk mail folder in her email about this program, decides to make a call, finds out it's a real thing. She goes to this, and now she's a semiconductor manufacturing technician at Intel. This was a woman who was having a hard time finding a job at a fast food restaurant. And now she's making semiconductors. Big success story. The other folks that I think do this really well are unions. Union apprenticeship programs are really effective. And they've got these training programs that they pull people in off the street teach them how to be electricians or pipe fitters or welders or HVAC. You know, some skills that, you know, some of these skills are rather hard to learn. So I think if we, you know, worked with community colleges and universities and unions and have the federal government be part of that ecosystem and that process and help with the funding of those programs through the AI Horizon Fund, we could figure out a way to transition people out of jobs that someday might not exist anymore into jobs that don't exist yet.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then turn it over to the audience, so please get your questions ready. So let's turn to the global context and talk about China a bit. So our colleague Dan Wong, who's at the Hoover Institution, has a new book out on China's strategy to dominate manufacturing and cutting-edge technology. And he observes in his book that the leadership class in the United States is dominated by lawyers, and the leadership class in China is dominated by engineers. And that lawyers, the strong suit is very good at protecting individual liberties, individual rights. Engineers, very good at building things. And so, speaking as an engineer in a tribe of lawyers, how do you think about that as a prism of analysis and thinking about our challenge of the United States versus China? Do we run the risk of, even if we are at the frontier of innovation, that China is going to be more effective in deploying these technologies throughout their economy, throughout their military, in a way that that's disadvantageous to us, and what should we be doing about it?
Well, yeah, I do worry about that, and I think you're onto something. When I first went to NASA, there was the National Defense Strategy in that year in 1996 or around then. We do this every year, and the National Defense Strategy kind of, you know, frames how we're going to acquire weapon systems and what we want our military to look like. It listed one of, I think it was one of the top 10 risks to the United States was the decreasing number of scientists and engineers who were graduating from college. That was like a risk to our that was a national security issue. Countries like Japan, you mentioned China, but I remember Japan used to have 5 times as many engineers as lawyers, and we have 5 times as many lawyers as engineers. Now, my general counsel is sitting at that table, so I got to be careful. I have a good lawyer joke, but I'm not going to tell it because Myra's sitting here, and she's a great lawyer, and we need lawyers. But a lawyer is also, well, sometimes in good ways, hold us back, I think, a little bit from doing things. We've got to encourage more people to go into technical fields. And when I see, you know, I saw something, you know, the other day about, you know, how poorly kids are now doing in math, and also how they're teaching math differently than it was taught to me. And my deputy chief of staff said the other day she was helping her 3rd grader with math homework, and she should be pretty good at math, but it's being taught in a different way, that it was actually kind of challenging. So we gotta figure this out. And I worry about, you know, China throws an enormous amount of technical expertise at problems. We had one program, I'm not going to go into what it was, but we have a program in the United States, a defense program, where we had a few thousand people working on it, and we know that China had 200,000 people working on the same problem with a lot of like talented people. Now, I will say for us, and I visited like a university in China and just like the scale, but when I go to universities in the United States, and I've met, you know, Chinese engineers and I mean, smart kids, but I think there's something about like us here in the United States willing to take risk, willing to push back against the government on things, on push back on leadership, I think we have this culture here of innovation that we don't have in other places. That's why we're able to, you know, land people on the moon in the 1960s. And yes, we did land people on the moon. And yes, the Earth is round, if there's anybody wondering. But I was talking to the director of JPL yesterday, David Gallagher, and he reminded me how we've landed stuff on Mars, dozens of times. Our success rate is like 90%. No other country can land anything on Mars. I mean, I think somebody was successful once. The Russians gave up. They failed. They fail over and over again. China's had a hard time doing it. China landed something on the moon recently, got a sample back. But we're really good at this stuff. It would be great if we had more people going into these fields. All of you should encourage your kids and grandkid. I have a 4-year-old grandkid. Her mom and dad don't know this, but she'll be an engineer or a scientist.
What are we've talked about some of the potential breakthroughs from AI. You talked about automated transport. What are the opportunities that you're most excited about, the breakthroughs that you're most excited about in this AI space?
I'd say, I think it's the same thing probably everybody as medicine, protein folding, new drugs, new materials, as an engineer, material science. Anybody seen that? It's a while ago when they started making the Star Trek movies. There was Star Trek 4. I can't remember which one that was, but it was the 4th one. I just looked this up. I looked it up on ChatGPT because in anticipation of a question like this, there was this thing with Scotty, and they were trying to move the whales for some reason, and they had this material, this transparent aluminum, something as strong as aluminum that you could see through. It's that kind of stuff in material science that we might be able to invent structures and build buildings that are much stronger but much lighter, and the material will be ultimately cheaper. We were talking about bringing down the price of houses earlier, that with new materials, maybe we're not going to need to take lumber, buy lumber from Canada. Well, we can't buy lumber from Canada anymore because it's too expensive. So now you got Donald Trump taking lumber out of national parks. Not exactly. Don't quote me on that, but it's that stuff. I mean, I'm really, really excited about that.
Let's open up to the audience. Okay, we have a question right back there.
Thanks. Hi, Senator Kelly. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. I'm Ismail. I'm a current master's student studying computer science. It's been amazing to hear about your initiative with the Horizon Funds. On the flip side, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how America can best support its frontier technology companies and help them stay competitive, whether you think they even need the extra support, and in particular your thoughts on the recent investment into Intel and the rumored loans for OpenAI.
The which loan?
I think there was a news cycle where it mentioned Sarah Fryer talking about getting loans for chips and data centers from the government.
Oh, getting loans from the government. Well, yeah. I remember, just recently somebody wasn't not only a loan, but it was going to be backed by the government. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. I think companies need to be able to manage their growth, in a way where they can build these, facilities within a model that's going to be successful for them economically. I do worry about the risk of a AI bubble, and if the bubble bursts, what is the drag going to be on the economy? And are we going to wind up in a recession that could make 2008 look like a party? But I could tell you what we can do to be helpful. We can help them help themselves by participating in a program that helps build the infrastructure. So when they go to a city like Tucson or anywhere else in the world to build their AI infrastructure, they don't get, sent packing. That happened in my hometown. I really want this to be successful. When Project Blue came there and said, hey, we need 50,000 houses worth of water every single day, the city council voted unanimously, no, you can't get that much water. We don't have enough water for people here. So now they re-engineered it a little bit. They decided instead of using flash evaporative cooling to just use air conditioning, but then the power usage went up to 256 megawatts. We do have the power, by the way, in Tucson. So the facility is actually going to get built there, but not in the city. It'll be built in the unincorporated Pima County, which I think is a good thing. It's creates jobs, but we need these data centers to be able to be built. We need them to be successful. We need to be in the right place. Not a good idea to put them in a neighborhood and you go over the fence and it's 60 decibels of noise, where the kids are riding their bikes. That's not a good answer either. So I think where the government can be helpful is working with these companies in a way that helps them move this technology along in a way that they can be successful and we can all benefit.
Could I ask, given how much this power regulation and building for the electricity grid is managed by states and localities, what should the federal government, what role do you imagine the federal government playing through the Horizon Fund or through other mechanisms to try to support the development?
Well, the other mechanisms is helping come up with where are we going to get all this power? Now, it didn't help. This administration is making it much harder to permit solar and wind energy. The president has this thing about the birds and the whales and the windmills, which I don't quite understand. Solar and wind has been 90% of the energy that we have added to the grid in the last few years. 90%. And he made it harder to permit projects that require federal permits. They all don't. We need the all of the above energy approach. So where the government could be helpful, we need to, in the next administration, fix this whole permitting issue. We also need to be able to, how do we add nuclear power, to the grid and do it that could be put behind the meter. So a company like, any data center doesn't necessarily have to connect to the grid. They could have their own power source, but we've got to be able to get not only licensing, but get permits for these things to be installed. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission doesn't have the manpower to do the necessary permitting and approvals required for large scale. We're talking about the big nuclear reactors and the SMRs. I'm on the Environment and Public Works Committee as well as Armed Services and Intelligence, so we talk about this a lot. Like they have to be looking at all of these things and try to move this permitting process along much more quickly. So we can help with that. We're trying.
Senator Kelly, thank you for joining us. A question, do you have any insight on how soon we might expect fusion power to be a reality?
I used to be on the board of a fusion power company before I was in the Senate called General Fusion in Canada. One of the physicists that was on the board would always remind us that the fusion power company was in a race, and the race was with batteries. Because as batteries became more dense, and eventually solar and wind beats everything. But now we're at a point where we're doing tests and some fusion power companies are building, test reactors that are going to be, and getting more than just milliseconds or a few seconds of operation. I think one recently got up to like 20 seconds. And the power out is, significantly more than the power in. I mean, enough where it makes this pretty obvious that this is going to be a real technology. Now, how long until we have something connected to the grid and providing real power to users? It feels like, to me, it's still about 10 years away. But it used to be 20 or 30 years away. So.
Hi. Thank you, Senator. I have a question regarding defense and armed forces. I see Anduril and Saronic who are building such amazing AI platforms, but I also see big defense contractors still hogging most of our budget. What sort of policy and other changes that Congress can do so we can play on a level playing field with the new AI and upcoming technologies on the defense front, where the Hoover Institute is doing a lot of good research on?
Trying to understand your question. I didn't catch the last part, but I think you were talking about companies like Palantir and Anduril and how they are trying to compete with the bigger defense contractors.
Because AI is driving a big change in how we defend and how we play offensive role, especially against a potential Taiwan conflict, right? So how do we empower AI-enabled defense against a potential
Well, first
adversary?
of all, I think it has a huge role in our national defense. And companies like Palantir and Anduril are really leading the way on this and are very innovative, and they're moving faster. And it's really to our benefit as a nation. They're building, I guess it's Anduril's building, and General Atomics building the collaborative combat aircraft, which is the wingman for the next generation air dominance fighter. So the next fighter we build is going to have wingmen that are unmanned, autonomous, maybe up to 8 of them each that'll carry weapons controlled by the guy in the airplane, and then he'll have these eight wingmen around. But we're seeing, rapid change on the battlefield in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. And AI is part of that already. Within a year or two, you're going to see much more autonomous drones flying and going after targets, which is we're trying to figure out some moral and ethical issues there. Like, do we want, and I think the answer so far is no. Do we want software, artificial intelligence making the decision to pick the target and decide to kill a person and then kill the person? We haven't gotten to that yet. I think we should have a person in the loop, but the challenge is our adversaries might not think the same way. And I think what we're going to see, so the drone innovation that has happened in Ukraine, the beginning of the war, nobody was using drones. It was artillery, and it was rockets, and then somebody decided one day, let me take this drone and put a bomb on it, like a hand grenade. And this stuff worked, and it works really, really well. I was in a military hospital in March in Kyiv, and I saw about 10 injured veterans. They were all amputees, single, or one case missing 2 legs and an arm and blind in both eyes. One of these guys stepped on a mine. The other 9 were hit by drones, FPVs, first-person view drones. And they've gone through a lot of innovation. And Jen, my chief of staff, we were in the drone factory, and these guys are changing. They're innovating on these drones every week. And because of jamming of GPS signals, they've now gone away from using GPS to navigate, GPS to navigate, but also jamming the uplink signal. Instead of being controlled by RF, they're now dragging fiber optic cables, like spiderweb thickness. So the whole battlefield now out there is covered in what looks like spider webs, because these drones fly one way, hit a target, and left 20 or 30 miles of fiber optic cable, very thin cable, behind it. But they're going to figure out a way to defeat that as well. So what will come next is you just have the drone take off, find the target, and kill the target. We've got a little bit of a problem with that. And I'm not so sure how this is all gonna come out in the wash here over the next couple of years, but it's something we have to figure out. Because right now, not a lot of us are comfortable with the robots making the decision and then following through.
Okay, one last question from the audience. Let's go over here.
Because then you wind up with like you're in the Terminator movie. We don't want that.
Hi, I'm Julie Bonham, an undergrad studying economics here, but my question is around sustainability regarding AI. And you mentioned how we have these solar panels and these windmills that we can use for AI, but with the US government pulling out of climate change conferences like the one in Brazil that happened recently, are you afraid that we're going to start relying on other countries like China and their innovative measures around sustainability to buoy these greener AI efforts?
Well, I hope not. I mean, we should be developing the technology here and not have to rely on China. And I wish we would be able to manufacture more of it here. Maybe with AI, we can bring down the manufacturing costs and we can do it here. We didn't entirely pull out of the conference. One of my Senate colleagues, Sheldon Whitehouse, who's the ranking member on the Environment and Public Works Committee, he was the sole representative of the U.S. government there. And by the way, got no support from the State Department, which is very unusual for a U.S. Senator to travel. So the administration did not like him being there. And this is a conference where this is where we talk about all these worldwide climate issues. China had a huge delegation. Even the Russians had a delegation. All the Europeans had big delegations. Chinese had a pavilion right in the middle, making all these deals on renewable energy, setting standards for policies between countries. And we had Sheldon. We had one guy, which kind of shows the situation we're in now. I'm very thankful that he decided to make the trip.
You said in your remarks, as with any new technology, we have to be humble and acknowledge that no one has all the answers, which in a way was the premise of the gathering that we had here today, bringing people of different backgrounds, different domains together to talk about issues that they all think are important and care about getting to the right answers. So you have a room of people who care about getting to the right answers on the same things that you're interested in. I'm wondering, as a policymaker, what are some of the issues that you would like them working on? We need better information, we need better analysis, we need better knowledge in order to make good public policy in this critical era.
Well, I think it's always good to be humble about things, but I think with AI, we got to be extra humble here, because I've heard a number of times in the books I've read about it, we don't even understand how this technology works. So that's something to figure out. I mean, I know we understand a lot of it, but there's some things we are still missing. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. There are still aspects of AI that we are having a challenging time understanding, like why this actually works as well as it does. I think that's important to solve those problems.
We are now at the end of our time. Before we go, I want to thank all of our attendees, participants, all of the speakers today, the SIEPR events team, all of the people who worked very hard to make this a success. And I want to give a final thanks to Senator Kelly for sharing these thoughts with us tonight, engaging in a conversation, and we all wish you the best as you're navigating this from the very important place in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Ramin. Thank you for the invite, everybody. Appreciate it.